We're so glad to have you here this week where we talk about Doctrine and Covenants 121 to 123, which contain some really beautiful scriptures, and they're taking place in a really difficult time. And in order to really understand the context of these three sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, which were all part of one letter that Joseph wrote from Liberty Prison, we really need the historical context. So Gunnar, can you help us with that?
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca. We left off with D&C 120, which was July 8th of 1838, and now we're in March 20th of 1839. So 9 months have gone by between these sections, and a lot has happened. It's been a real proving time for Joseph. And by proving, I don't mean that it was a time for him to stand up and show himself, as much as it was a time for him to be pressed and formed and turned into something more than who he was when he went into Liberty Jail. And he did come out of Liberty Jail a changed man. Going into Liberty Jail, he was a bit of a fighter. And he always retained a bit of that. But he was more tempered coming out of Liberty Jail, which was something that had to happen. We talked some podcasts ago about the Lord supporting us when we made decisions. That the Lord in the Doctrine and Covenants gives us his doctrine, but when it comes to administrative things, we are to counsel together, we are to pray together, we are to reason things out in our minds and make the best decision we can and move forward, and the Lord will support us. And Joseph was doing that, but he ends up in Liberty Jail. And in my opinion, that was the Lord supporting Joseph, because Joseph had to change. He had to evolve as the prophet of the church to bring about the rest of his mission. So let me get on to some of these key things that have happened. So our last revelation was in July 8th. And if you recall from our last podcast, on July 4th, Sidney Rigdon gave this fiery sermon and threatened everyone with extermination if they were to come and try to disturb the saints. Mm-hmm. The church was tired of being persecuted. The persecution that they were going through was more than the persecution that we tend to go through. Persecution we tend to experience is people saying, "You're not Christian." And we say, "We are Christian." It's in our name, right? We worship Jesus Christ. It's a different Jesus Christ. You worship a different Christ. You worship a different God. They make up all these things about us that aren't true, and that tends to be our persecution. There are notable exceptions to that, where people are physically abused. The worst case most recently was the tragedy in Michigan. But these early saints, they experienced the persecution at gunpoint constantly. There was a lot of violence. And so now we get to August. It's August 6th, and we have an election going on, and the saints go to Gallatin, Missouri, to cast their votes, and a fight erupts because the locals there don't want the Mormons voting. And so it turns into a skirmish, and there are no great casualties, but it ignites the Missouri-Mormon War. So now September and October is the war. There's a siege on this little town, this little settlement called DeWitt, and nobody can get in or out. The governor refuses to intervene. The saints eventually have to evacuate under duress on October 11th. Then there's something in the middle of October called the Daviess County Expedition. The church militia is executing sorties to secure threatened settlements, because there are more settlements that are threatened. And we end up with a lot of conflict that's going back and forth. There's a swirl of reprisals and counter reprisals.
And what kind of stuff are we talking about when we're talking about reprisals and counter reprisals? Are we talking about gun battles? Are we talking about...
It is violent because homes get sacked in the process, and it's back and forth, right?
Yep.
It's a tit for tat, and it just further inflames the region. Then you get October 25th. It's an actual battle now. It's the Battle of Crooked River. And in this case, the Missouri State Militia seizes several Mormon pickets and takes several hostages. And now the Saints are trying to liberate those hostages. And the Apostle David W. Patton, we've spoken a little bit about David Patton, he leads the rescue effort, and he ends up getting fatally wounded and becomes the first apostolic martyr of the church. In Missouri, there's one gentleman killed, and this becomes an important point. His name is Moses Rowland. He gets killed. There are about 5 Missouri militia who are wounded. On the LDS side, you have David W. Patton, who dies, Gideon Carter dies, and Patrick O'Banion, who was fighting for the Saints but was not a member of the church. Wow. And there are several LDS folks who are wounded. So this then gets reported as a massacre by the Mormons, that they've gone in there and shot everybody up. And now Governor Boggs issues his extermination order 2 days after this battle.
So I just want to confirm that I heard correctly. 1 Missourian died. 3 Latter-day Saints died.
Yeah.
And it was reported as a massacre by the Mormons against the Missourians.
Right. Yeah. And the big quote from that extermination order is, "The Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state if necessary." It made it legal to kill Mormons. And that order stayed in effect until the 1970s. They just forgot to remove it. Mormons weren't being killed random in Missouri, but the law was still on the books.
Yeah.
So let me just hit those dates again. October 25th, Battle of Crooked River. October 27th, the extermination order. Now, October 30th, you have the massacre at Hans Mill, which is a massacre. And what you have here is you've got a bunch of vigilantes and militia from Missouri. They go and attack this isolated Mormon hamlet called Hans Mill. 200 to 250 attackers kill 17 Latter-day Saint men and boys. You've got about 15 wounded. You have 4 attackers wounded. So 4 Missourians were wounded. Nobody was killed from the Missourians. Phineas Richards, Willard Richards' brother, has his 15-year-old son is killed in this action. I bring it up because Phineas Richards continues faithful in the church and ends up in Nauvoo on the city council. And when they're debating what to do about the Nauvoo expositor, he stands up and says, "I support Brother Joseph in whatever he decides we need to do." Before, Joseph said we should destroy the press. Just a blanket statement. However this thing went, he supported Brother Joseph. And I just think that's so touching, knowing that he had followed Brother Joseph into the Restoration, had followed Brother Joseph into Missouri, had seen his teenage boy killed because he had followed Brother Joseph. And in Nauvoo, he says, I'm all in. I'm 100% with the prophet, no matter what he decides. I think it's a beautiful, touching story.
I feel like it says a lot about the personal witness that he had, that Joseph was a prophet.
And that's a great point, because what I always end up coming back to in my mind is COVID and the prophet saying, listen, the vaccines are safe. I'm getting vaccinated. You should get vaccinated. And I heard of people who were saying he's in with the pharmaceutical industry. That's why he's saying that. And you're a card carrying, temple worthy member of the church, and you're saying that. What would you say if your son got killed? If your son died because you were following the prophet, right?
Right. I appreciate you bringing up COVID because that's such a nuanced area. And I feel like in that case in particular, there were people who personally, like, I felt that President Nelson gave a pronouncement of the vaccines are safe, which I understood to mean this is not a conspiracy to kill everybody because those conspiracy theories were going on, right? But there's always some people for whom vaccination is contraindicated.
Yeah.
And I felt like he left enough room for us to follow the personal guidance of the Holy Ghost to us, as he does with everything, right? That we're to get our witness from the Lord as well as from the prophet. But people in that case, when perhaps the personal direction that they received was not in harmony, or when they were already suspicious
Or
of
entrenched, or just entrenched in a position.
And yes, that they were not able to hear. And I think that's one of those areas, like vaccine is an area on one side of the fence. I think there's other areas on the other side of the fence where we struggle with that. It's always easy to follow the dead prophet.
Yeah. So I really appreciate how sensitive you're being, right, in your statement there. Perhaps I wasn't as sensitive as I should have been. But what I'm trying to say is my issue wasn't so much that we didn't just all line up and get our shots. My point was that there was a group of us who then started accusing the prophet of essentially being a fallen prophet over whether or not vaccines were safe. I'm a convert. We've talked about that before. I've been a member for 33 years or so. And that was the first time I felt that the church was suddenly just split into these two camps, and we were divided.
Yeah.
And if we can't not be divided over something like that, what's going to happen when it gets really bad?
Yeah.
I just think it's important for all of us, and I'm speaking to myself, to just be careful about where we're going to plant our flag.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that because I feel like there's several issues here. And I respond as I do because of friends that I have. I have one friend who has a number of health issues that are not on the list, the official list of contraindications. And she gave very sincere thought and prayer to what she should do in this situation, prepared to die if that's what the Lord required of her. But her responsibility was to find out what was she to do.
Yeah.
And she chose not to get vaccinated while still sustaining the prophet. And I had somebody else making judgments to me about people like her.
Sure.
And I know that there was that struggle. And then I was in conversations with people saying that the prophet was in cahoots with the wicked pharmaceuticals. Like, I've heard all of those things. And I think for me personally, that was a time of really seeking to understand, what does it mean to follow the prophet? What do I do when prophetic direction does not fit with how I understand the world? How do I move forward? I think that's just such a fascinating, complex thing. And it was hard to watch people lose their testimonies over it. People lose their friendships over it. Wards become divided over it. And kind of like you just said that Joseph needed that experience in Liberty Prison, which was awful. I feel that in order for us to go forward in all that is coming, we need to know how to sustain the prophet and receive personal revelation.
It just occurred to me that it could have been a trial for the church to help elevate the very thing we're talking about, so that we could understand it and understand, say, our weaknesses better, that we may be better prepared for when it matters even more.
Yeah.
And that's some of what was going on
Yeah.
with Joseph, with
Yeah.
Liberty Jail. Now, by October 31st, Governor Boggs has called out the state militia, and they've come and they've surrounded Far West. They cut them off from all communications. They couldn't get letters in or out, and they've got Far West under siege. And there's a brother, George Hinkle, who's the LDS Caldwell militia commander. He's highly regarded. He's in good standing, considered a friend of Joseph Smith. Joseph and Emma had bought his house in Far West. So
they're close.
Yeah. And he negotiates a peace conference between the Mormon leaders and General Lucas and his commanders. It's Joseph, it's Sidney Rigdon, it's George W. Robinson, Lyman White, Parley P. Pratt, brings them out to meet with General Lucas. And when he gets there with General Lucas, he says, "Here are the prisoners I promised you." And they're all arrested. In return for doing this, General Lucas gives George Hinkle Joseph's house.
I was thinking you were going to say gives people of Far West safe passage or something like that.
He gets his house back after having sold it to Joseph. And now General Lucas orders that all these men are to be taken out and executed at dawn. And he assigns the job to General A.W. Donovan, who refuses to execute the order and says, "I do this. This is cold-blooded murder, and I'll have you, if you do this, me or anybody else, this is cold-blooded murder, and I'll see you before an earthly tribunal." So he doesn't execute them, but takes them prisoner. And so now they're going to be taken to Richmond for a court of inquiry. And this court of inquiry takes place between November 12th and November 29th. So it's a few weeks.
I just want to say something really fast.
Yeah.
I should have said it before. Alexander Donovan standing up to his superior officer in a situation where the law is that it's legal to kill a Mormon. Says, "I don't care what the law says. This is cold-blooded murder. I will not stand for it, and I will ensure that you meet justice if you try and pursue this." What kind of courage?
Yeah, but I want to point out that it's the same sort of thing that happens with Joseph and those who are with him in Liberty Jail when he escapes Liberty Jail in April. They're supposed to be transported somewhere for a trial, but the person in charge of transporting them knows that he's transporting them to be executed, and he doesn't want to have any part of it. So he gives them supplies and everything that they need to get the heck out of Missouri and get to Illinois, and he allows them to escape.
Yeah.
And to your point, we do point out Donovan's courage, but there are multiple instances where people who were not members of the church said, "This isn't right," and they took care of the saints. Yeah, you see that in Quincy, Illinois, when the saints were all driven out here just in a few months from where we're talking right now. They're driven out of Missouri, and they go to Illinois, and they have no place to go, and they end up staying in Iowa. But Quincy, Illinois, took in so many. And people who had boarders who were paying kicked the boarders out and took Mormons in for no money to take care of them.
Those examples are just so powerful to me.
Yeah.
And the people who had the capacity to not engage in the mob thought, right? To hold on to their humanity when everybody around them is saying something else. To see goodness for goodness and evil for evil.
It's something we can all remember and celebrate and try to replicate
Yeah.
It's sometimes I feel like we look back at history and we see how the mobs got all worked up.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why they got all worked up is because they were ignorant and stupid people. We're more evolved now and we've got better education. Most of those people couldn't even read and write. Not only can we do that, but we can post on social media. And they had to
Right,
get
right.
information
Yeah,
from one person to another. You had to, I always say, you had to have a friend with a horse. So you can give them a note and
Yeah.
let them run it over
Yeah.
there and hear information move so quickly. Yet the same thing happens. People get all worked up over things that aren't even true. It's so easy to forget to pause
Yeah.
and make
Yeah.
sure you're reacting to something that's real.
So easy to see our brother as our enemy. And at the minute we start demonizing someone, we've lost the spirit.
Yeah.
And I guess there's one more thing I want to say about these people, like the Alexander Donovans and the guard who allowed Joseph and the others to escape. For me, it is clear that God raised them up for that, to be there at that moment. And it's a humbling thing for me because it says, it's not the Lord's plan that all of his servants should be in the church. Could Alexander Donovan have stood up and saved Joseph's life had he been a member of the church? And I thought it was just Joseph, but it sounds like it was all of the brethren. It just helps me to be a little more humble and consider that the Lord has a work for me, and the Lord has a work for somebody else, and his plan with somebody else might be quite different. Where he leads them might be quite different from where he leads me, but it's all so that we can work together to build up his kingdom.
There are a lot of people who are not members of the church who are doing phenomenal work to bring unity
Yeah.
among
Yeah.
religious sects,
Yeah.
non-religious sects.
Yeah.
There's some really beautiful work being done by a lot of beautiful people, and we certainly haven't cornered the market on beautiful people.
And now I'll be quiet so that we can continue this history.
That's okay.
Throw that in.
I want to talk about it. So now they're going to be taken to Richmond for a tribunal, for a court of inquiry. And on the journey is when we have that famous scene where Joseph and his compatriots are all in chains, and you have these militia who are just vile and talking about what they're going to do to the Mormon women and what they have done to the Mormon women. And it's just really vulgar, disgusting stuff. It's recorded in Parley P. Pratt's autobiography, and I want to read his exact words to everybody. He writes, "I had listened till I became so disgusted, shocked, horrified, and so filled with the spirit of indignant justice that I could scarcely refrain from rising upon my feet and rebuking the guards, but had said nothing to Joseph or anyone else, although I lay next to him and knew he was awake. On a sudden, he rose to his feet and spoke in a voice of thunder, or as the roaring lion, uttering, as near as I can recollect, the following words: 'Silence, ye fiends of the infernal pit! In the name of Jesus Christ, I rebuke you and command you to be still. I will not live another minute and bear such language. Cease such talk, or you or I die this instant.' He ceased to speak. He stood erect in terrible majesty, chained and without a weapon, calm, unruffled, and dignified as an angel. He looked upon the quailing guards, whose weapons were lowered or dropped to the ground, whose knees smote together, and who, shrinking into a corner or crouching at his feet, begged his pardon, and remained quiet till a change of guards. I have seen the ministers of justice clothed in magisterial robes, and criminals arraigned before them while life was suspended on a breath. I have witnessed a Congress in solemn session to give laws to nations. I have tried to conceive of kings, of royal courts, of thrones and crowns, and of emperors assembled to decide the fate of kingdoms. But dignity and majesty have I seen but once, as it stood in chains at midnight in a dungeon in an obscure village of Missouri." I've seen that moment portrayed in film, it's never come across to me as beautiful and powerful as Parley's own words.
Yeah.
So now they arrive in Richmond for this court of inquiry on November 12th to November 29th. And the idea here with this court of inquiry is to decide, was there a crime? What was the crime?
Right.
Who
Right.
committed the crime?
Right.
Is there enough evidence to suggest that we could have a trial and sentence someone because of these crimes and sort out what this is all about? So at the end, we're supposed to decide, yeah, we have enough evidence to do something, and to do something to this group of people or these
Right.
two people or whoever, whatever the number is. And then you throw them in jail until you can have a trial.
Right.
So, they've arrested 9 people or so, and they're going to have this court of inquiry. So they're asking people to come forward to witness against Joseph. And so a lot of good Mormon folk are going down there and saying, listen, I want to testify on behalf of Joseph. I want to help
Yep.
defend him.
Yeah.
Anybody who showed up wanting to defend Joseph Smith was immediately arrested and put with Joseph on trial. So by the time the trial started, there were 64 members of the church on trial with Joseph for what had happened during this Missouri, what we call the Missouri-Mormon War.
64 co-defendants.
64 co-defendants. But what I'm trying to say is roughly 54, over
Yeah.
50 of them came to be witnesses on behalf of Joseph and got arrested for being witnesses. So what ended up happening was the only witnesses, the only people who testified were people who were testifying against Joseph.
Right.
But the other thing that they did is they said, all right, if you don't testify against Joseph, we're going to arrest you. We're going to arrest you and you will be on trial with Joseph. But if you do testify against him, we won't arrest you. You won't be put on trial. So you end up with people who are really near and dear to Joseph, but who just don't have the backbone testifying against Joseph. People like W. Phelps,
Oh, no.
who was the publisher of the Times and Seasons paper, right?
Yeah.
And he ends up in the wilderness for a while, and then there's a beautiful reconciliation story where he comes back to the church and Joseph forgives him. All the saints forgive him, because when somebody comes back to the church like that, Joseph can't make a unilateral call. He can say that he's forgiven him, but to be brought back into fellowship, everybody
The
has to
council
raise
has
their
to
hand. Yeah, and it's a
Right.
beautiful reconciliation that they have, and I hope we'll have some time at another podcast to talk about that. It's a beautiful example of forgiveness, but it's also a great example of humility. With W. Phelps' letter requesting Joseph's forgiveness is a beautiful letter. It's a tearjerker. So you get people testifying against Joseph, and after this inquiry, this court of inquiry, a handful of those 64 people end up in jail. So for treason, they commit to Liberty Jail Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Lyman White, Alexander McRae, and Caleb Brown. Now, we don't talk too much about Alexander McRae or Caleb Brown. Those two gentlemen were scribes for Joseph. And I guess we can be thankful that they were in Liberty Jail, because they were the ones who wrote the letters. Joseph would dictate
Right.
them. They're the ones who wrote the revelations we're going to be talking about as Joseph dictated them. Lyman White was, I think at this point, he was a future apostle. And then, of course, Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith were in the first presidency with Joseph. And then they sent to Richmond Jail on the charge of murder, or I should say being suspected of murder, of Moses Rowland. We talked about the Moses earlier.
Wow.
He was the one Missourian who was killed at Crooked River. And that was Parley P. Pratt, Morris Phelps, Luman Gibbs, Norman Shearer, Darwin Chase, and King Follett. King Follett, who is most famous for the King Follett discourse. The discourse Joseph gave that was named after King Follett had died. And he was a close friend of Joseph Smith's. So that's 12 people, 6 to Liberty Jail, 6 to Richmond. I always think of it as 6 and 3. I always think of it as 9 instead of 12, because half the people who went to Richmond ended up getting released early. They just decided to drop any kind of charge against them. So you ended up with Phelps, Pratt, and King Follett in Richmond jail for the long term. So now we're in January. And January 16th, the Saints, they're just destitute in Far West. The mob has come in. They've taken their cattle. They've taken all of their livestock. They've burnt their fields. They've taken many of their homes. What they left the Saints with was bedding and one set of clothing. And they were having to sleep outside in the middle of a very cold winter. They would sleep under wagons. For some reason, I never really quite understood this one, Joseph's mother was able to retain her home. She writes about how the whole yard in front of her house was covered with saints who were sleeping out in the open with the snow piling up on them as they were sleeping. It was awful. And on the 16th of January, Joseph writes a letter, and it's from Joseph, Sidney, and Hiram. It's from the first presidency. He covers several things. The most famous is he sets the precedent that the senior apostle in the quorum of the 12 is to be in charge of the church when the first presidency is unavailable. So in this case, they're all in prison. So he says, figure out which one of you is the senior apostle. That's what we usually think of this letter for. But towards the end of the letter, he says something that has, from the moment I first read it, it really struck me. And he writes, "Neither think strange concerning the fiery trials with which we are tried, as though some strange thing had happened unto us." And I think about, you talk about some of your fiery trials, and I think about you, as I'm thinking about you as I read this idea, don't think something just strange happened to us, right? So neither think strange concerning the fiery trials with which we are tried, as though some strange thing had happened unto us. Remember that all have been partakers of like afflictions. Therefore, rejoice in our afflictions, by which you are perfected, and through which the captain of our salvation was perfected also. Let your hearts and the hearts of all the saints be comforted with you, and let them rejoice exceedingly, for great is our reward in heaven, for so persecuted the wicked, the prophets which were before us. When I first read this, and he says this line, rejoice in our afflictions, by which you are perfected, and through which the captain of our salvation was perfected also, it was an aha moment for me. I had not considered the fact that Jesus taking on the atonement, A, I had not thought of it as an affliction, and B, I hadn't thought of that as being part of his perfection process.
Right.
I had thought of the resurrection as being part of becoming perfected. And so this idea that the Lord is perfecting us as we go through our trials, I think it's a beautiful idea and a beautiful thought.
I agree.
Yeah. Joseph Smith said he was a rough stone rolling, and that he had a lot of imperfections, and the Lord was just knocking them off. But it was a painful process going through that process of
But
perfection.
also, who is not? Which of us is not a rough stone roller?
Yeah, some of us are a rough cube rolling. It's very difficult to get some of us rolling. All right, so that's January. We can jump now to...
No, we can't yet.
Okay.
During all of this time, Emma is having to flee,
Yes.
having to deal with all of this, and she and Joseph are corresponding.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. I've gone through Emma's and Joseph's letters. Have found them just so touching, reading about their love for one another. And I feel you have to remember this is at this time in the United States, we were rather prudish, right? And we weren't real open with our feelings. So to read these letters it's just gorgeous. I think you're asking me maybe a little bit about the musical.
Yeah, I'm excited that we're going to be adding these songs at the end, but I just thought, did they take place before DNC 121 or after? Is it?
It's throughout, but I was just going to bring up one letter from April 4th, which is just a little bit later. And it's only because there's a cute little thing in there that Joseph writes that caught my attention, but it's not so much because of what they said to one another. But I wrote a song called Letters of Love, and it's for during this period of time when Joseph's in Liberty Jail and Emma has been chased out of her home and's had to flee first to Iowa, then to Illinois. And she's had to leave Joseph so far behind, and it's breaking her heart. But she writes these words, and I thought they wrote such great words to each other that I should pull phrases that they used in their letters and turned it into a song that's a correspondence back and forth between them, which I think came out really nicely. And it's a beautiful moment, I think, in the show.
Agree.
And so I think at the end, if that's agreeable with you, Rebecca, we'll play that song at the end. It's something that we don't usually talk about, their relationship and what was happening with them and their relationship. While Joseph was in Liberty Jail, we talk about his suffering. We talk about the DNC that we're going to be covering. But there are all these other people who were also suffering. Joseph had the benefit of having seen Heavenly Father, right? Multiple times, having seen Jesus Christ, multiple times, having spoken to Jesus Christ, multiple times. It was hard on him, but he knew. And as he said in his own testimony, and I knew that God knew it, right? I knew it, and I knew that God knew it, and I could not deny it. But these other guys, his scribes, they went through the same thing, and they're going through it because they believed Joseph. They didn't see Jesus Christ. They didn't see Heavenly Father. And I think that for me, their experience is what's probably most relevant for me.
Yeah.
I have felt it. They obviously felt it, but I haven't seen it. So all I was going to say about this letter on April 4th is that in the middle of this letter, Joseph writes, I want to see little Frederick. So that was his youngest child, right? I want to see little Frederick, Joseph, Julia, and Alexander, Joanna. Hang on. There is no Joanna Smith. So who is he talking about here?
Yeah.
Frederick is Frederick G. William Smith. We know him. Joseph was Joseph III, his biological son. Julia is Julia Murdoch Smith, the adopted daughter. Alexander is his son. Joanna was a young teenage girl, like 13, that both her parents had died, and they adopted her. She grew up to young adulthood with Joseph and Emma. We hardly ever talk about her, but they took her in. So Frederick, Joseph, Julia, Alexander, Joanna, and Old Major. And so who's Old Major?
That's the dog, isn't it?
That's
the
right.
big mastiff?
That's right. That's Joseph's dog. And I just thought it was sweet that he wrote that he was missing his dog. And he got the dog as a gift when he was on Zion's camp. So about 4 or 5 years earlier. And the dog's name is Major. So I guess now the dog was getting old. So he's Old Major.
Wow.
But it's a white British Mastiff. It's a very large dog.
Wow.
And then he also writes, he says, don't let those little fellows ever forget me. And it was cute in Emma's letters to Joseph when she would talk about the children, she would always refer to them as fellows, right? Alexander couldn't even walk, and he was so young. But she writes to Joseph later that He's just a strong little fellow. And if he gets his hands on a chair, he just runs all over the house with the chair holding him up. So it was neat to see them writing about their family.
It's so tender to see that very personal, human, relatable father, mother, husband, wife, that communication between them.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So now with all of that, we're March 20th, and Joseph's been in prison now for 4 months. It's a terrible place. The ceiling is 6.5 feet tall. There are 2 windows. The windows are opposite each other on opposite walls. They're 6 inches tall and 1.5, 2 feet wide, depending upon which source you look at, with a single bar going across it. The windows are north and south, so you're really never getting direct sunlight coming in from those windows. But what you are getting is the winter wind blowing through the place, right? There's no toilet. They're going to the bathroom in a bucket. The internal dimensions, it's about 14 feet in one direction, 14.5 feet in the other direction. There's straw on the floor. Yeah, at one point, Joseph writes to Emma and asks for a blanket. And Emma writes back and says, "We don't have any blankets. I'm sorry, we don't have any. Everything had been taken away." She came and visited him a couple of times. Hiram's wife comes and visits Hiram to show him his baby, whom he had never seen.
So we call this Liberty Jail, but it's really Liberty Dungeon.
Right. It's considered a dungeon. Now, the guards, I think, were fairly reasonable. They let him out of the dungeon into the upper room, which was still very dark. During the day, they could be upstairs, but then they bring him back down. And from time to time, they take him outside and walk him around outside. They got to the point where their eyes would hurt really badly for not seeing sunlight, for just being in the dark. There are stories about them being fed food that wasn't really food. The saints would try to sneak around the building and give them stuff through the little window. But you also have stories of townsfolk coming and yelling and throwing things into those little windows. Wow. Yeah, there's no way to couch it as not disagreeable. And the thing is, they were put there once they had that court of inquiry. They said, "Okay, we'll have the trial in the spring, so we're going to put you in these jails into the spring." And so that's when they were allowed to escape, was in April. They were transferring them to have the actual trial. And they let them, at that point, the guards let them escape.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so that is the context when Joseph says, "O God, where art thou?
Yeah.
And where is the pavilion that covereth thy hiding place?" I'm so struck there with the truth that the Lord wants us to bring him our distress. It's not faithless to say, "God, where art thou?" The faithful thing is to trust him enough to take that anguish to him and say, "Hey, I'm really struggling." And I also love the way that he says in verse 4, "O Lord God Almighty, maker of heaven, earth, and seas, and of all things that in them are, and who controllest and subjectest the devil." And by controllest, I understand, has the power to say stop. The Father can at any time. And Joseph had so many times cast out devils in the Lord's name. And the dark and benighted dominion of Sheol, stretch forth thy hand, let thine eye pierce, let thy pavilion be taken up. Let thine ear be inclined, let thine heart be softened. Let thy bowels be moved with compassion towards us. His faith in the Lord, earlier on in verse 2, he says, "How long shall thy hand be stayed and thine eye, yea, thy pure eye, behold from the eternal heavens the wrongs of thy people and of thy servants, and thine ear be penetrated with their cries." Joseph, in the midst of all the sufferings for the Lord that he is doing, does not question the Lord's goodness.
Yeah.
He doesn't question the purity of the Lord's eyes, nor does he question that the Lord can hear him. He doesn't understand.
Nor does he wonder if maybe there is no God.
There's no rebellion here.
Right.
He is aggrieved. He's bringing his lament. He's saying, I don't get this. But at the same time that he says, I don't get this, he also says, I know thou art good. And I just love the faith that's expressed in that.
Yeah.
And it aligns with what you had expressed from his letter in January. But I guess now it's also interesting to me that what brings forth this outpouring of anguish is his concern for the people.
Yeah. Because he talks about verse 6. He says, remember thy suffering saints, O our God. To your point about he's not just praying about himself. Remember thy suffering saints.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is just wonderful about the Lord's response is that he says, let virtue garnish thy thoughts. Verse 45, let thy bowels also be full of charity towards all men. This is a guy whose eyes are hurting because he's not getting enough sunlight, who's freezing cold, whose wife doesn't have blankets, right? The whole town has been sent, is walking hundreds of miles through a terrible winter. And the Lord says, let thy bowels be full of charity towards all men. Let virtue garnish thy thoughts unceasingly. Then shall thy confidence wax strong in the presence of God, and the doctrine of the priesthood shall distill upon your soul as the dews from heaven. It's a beautiful message for all of us.
Gunnar, as you were talking about that, it struck me. Not only are all of these terrible things happening, but they are happening because some of his most trusted people turned against him, delivered him into the hands of his enemies, became witnesses against him at the trial. He is dealing with betrayal trauma at the same time that he's dealing with all the rest of this.
Mm-hmm.
I have been in that space where all I can think about is how wrong somebody was, how black their soul must be. That's sort of horribleizing, but I've been there. And at that point, the Lord is saying, let virtue garnish thy thoughts, and thy bowels be filled with charity towards all men. Wow, what a call. Another part that I just love about this is that no power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood.
Yeah, so that sentence is a very difficult sentence to read as it's written, right? Let me rephrase it, because it's written as in the negative, no power, right?
Yeah.
So let me flip it and see what you think here. Power or influence by the priesthood ought to be maintained only by persuasion and by long suffering, by gentleness and meekness, and by love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly enlarge the soul without hypocrisy and without guile.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is that our power and our influence must be maintained by these things, by persuasion, long suffering, not by saying, because I hold the priesthood.
Right.
And for me as a woman, I love it especially because it says to me, if power and influence cannot be maintained by the reason that somebody holds the priesthood, nor can it be maintained because I'm the senior companion on my mission, or because, like all this list of things. My mission was difficult in terms of our understanding of this principle. And I had a senior companion who informed me that as the junior companion, I did not have the right to book appointments with people who came to me and asked me if we could go. My
son, his first senior companion, told him that he was only allowed to use one sheet of toilet paper when he went to the bathroom. And maybe it was 2 sheets, but it wasn't more than that, and would get really angry if he used more than that.
Yeah. Unrighteous dominion, right?
It's exactly that. It's also just a wonderful moment in their lives, the lives of those missionaries, to learn how to be a leader and how to be a follower and what works and what doesn't work. I was a soccer coach for years. I got some of the best coaching lessons from being a player and having some bad coaches. It was like, okay, I know not to say that. I know not to do that.
Yeah, and so that's what happened on my mission, because I had such a difficult experience as a junior companion. I went, okay, I will not pull rank. When I am senior companion, I will not pull rank on my junior. And I'll tell you, my first junior companion, we were headed off to go visit with a new member, and we have an appointment. And she stops in the middle of the road and she says, "I'm tired. We're not going." And it was like on my lips to say, "Oh, yes, we
Suck it up,
are."
Buttercup.
And I remembered, I cannot. It's persuasion, gentleness, meekness. What I did not know was that the senior companion who had been so tyrannical towards me then became her senior companion, was her trainer. And when she came to be my junior, the tyrannical trainer, the trainer who had been tyrannical towards me, said, "When Sister Burnham goes senior, she is going to be in charge. She is going to tell you everything. She's going to try and boss you on everything." And so she had come into the companionship with this giant chip on her shoulder. But I had already learned that was not what I wanted to be. And I really anchored in these principles.
So I've got on verse 43, it changed my life.
Tell me about that.
So this is 6 months after I joined the church. I'm leading a project team in software development. And I have one guy who is stabbing me in the back all the time. He and I are at war all the time. He reports to me, but he is trying to sabotage me at every turn. He's going 2 levels above my head, complaining about me. He's going to HR. He's making my life miserable. In my relationship with him, I was exceptionally good at reproving betimes with sharpness. That was how I managed this guy. I was on him. I was not compassionate or empathetic, anything. And I happened to mention it to my bishop or something like this, that I was having this problem at work, and he put me to this verse. And I realized I was good with the first 4 words. Reprove betimes with sharpness. I had that, but I didn't have when moved upon by the Holy Ghost. I didn't have the showing forth afterwards and increase in love, etc. So I waited for this guy to do something that was good, which he did do good things, right? And I made sure in a very public way that I commended him for his work. And honestly, it wasn't like I was making a big deal over something that wasn't something. Right?
Yeah.
Our relationship changed fast, and he ended up becoming a great ally. We became great partners and great supporters of each other. And when I say fast, I mean it was like within a few weeks. It wasn't longer than that.
That is so beautiful.
Yeah. Because what had happened, the last few words here, you do this lest he esteemed thee to be his enemy. And that was the issue. He thought I was his enemy.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought he was my enemy.
Yeah.
We thought we were each other's enemy. We weren't. This verse changed my life. And I made sure to do this all the time at work.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
I feel like these 3 sections, especially 121 and 122, are just full of all the consolation that we need in the midst of our fiery trials. Yeah. There is all the assurance that the Lord is there, and there is the way to continue to follow Jesus when things are at their very worst. And it does redound to our blessing.
Yeah. I would recommend everybody to read these 3 sets of scriptures. There's so much wonderful stuff. But I think 121 really focuses on what you just said. I would like to maybe close my thoughts on the last verse in 123, where Joseph writes, "Therefore, dearly beloved brethren, let us cheerfully do all things that lie in our power. And then may we stand still with the utmost assurance to see the salvation of God and for his arm to be revealed."
That is beautiful.
He's there freezing, sick, in Liberty Jail, and he says, let us cheerfully do all things in our power.
That's how I want to be. We need to hear your music. I love this song.
Thank you. I love it too. Let's listen.
affectionate wife. Thou hast held my heart so long, it is thine own. If God once more will spare my life, I'll bring it back to you where it belongs.
Dear husband, no one but God knows the reflections of my mind that awful day. Forced from our home through sleet and snow, leaving you in chains, in prison far away. Yet I still live, and I am willing to suffer even more for Jesus Christ, if that is what the Lord has called me for. Oh, light of my life and choice of my heart, separated though never truly apart, you live in my soul, you're the joy of my dreams, the breath of my life, my very essence and being.
I am ever yours, Joseph.
I am ever yours, affectionately, Emma.
Tell the children their father loves them perfectly. Tell them father says they must always be good, you see, and mind their mother in all things and ever treasure thee. And please don't let those little fellows ever forget me.
The love I hold within my heart for you outweighs all the pain and dark and cold I know today. I pray that Jesus Christ will light your way and bring you safely back to me again one day.
When I think upon the day when I will see you yet again, what floods of joy and love consume my soul and heart, and then
Undaunted, firm and gentle, unwavering and wise, you're the blessing of my youth and the glory of my eyes.
memories and visions of your love consume my mind. My heart is thine forever, and our souls are one entwined. Oh, light of my life and choice of my heart, separated though never truly apart, you live in my soul, you're the joy of my dreams, the breath of my life, my very essence and being.
My very essence.
My being.
I am ever yours, affectionately, Emma.
I am ever yours, Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you. I just love the tenderness in that song.
I think it sets a really neat mood, the solo violin there. You know, when I wrote it, I thought maybe that's too much. I could shorten that down, but I felt that it brings such a beautiful spirit, and the melody is so pretty that I'm going to leave it. This is for a stage production. Can be something going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I learned today in this study is I want to place all my confidence in the Lord and face hardship, trial, affliction with the assurance that we are in his hands. He has a reason and he will bless us. We continue to trust and take counsel.
Yeah. And for me, the big takeaway is don't be thinking that whatever it is you're going through is not for your good. There is something in that trial for you. And sometimes we make the mistake of sitting down in the middle of our trial. And we need to understand that our role is to always move forward in faith. Keep the faith and move forward. Keep that cheerful countenance. And don't think that some strange thing has happened to us. It is part of the Lord perfecting us.
I want to say one more thing on that, which is when the cheerful countenance is impossible, when it is so hard and you cannot take any more. I love how Joseph went to the Lord and said,
Hey, this is so much. This is too much. I'm really struggling here.
and the Lord gave him peace. And we can trust him.
What was neat about that is he said, where are you? Where
Yeah,
are you, God?
yeah.
So he wasn't hearing the Lord. He
Yeah.
felt the absence of the Lord.
Yeah.
And I need you.
And that is, depression is like that.
yeah. By the middle of 121, the Lord starts speaking to him.
Yeah.
And then I think that becomes his resolution, is the Lord is talking to him again. Somehow the Lord had withdrawn his spirit. And I think about Christ, the Lord withdrew from Christ too, as he was going through the atonement. This was something Christ had to do by himself, right? And that's what happened here with Joseph. And I think we probably all have those moments. And I feel like that's the moment that the thieves come upon us as we're walking on our way to Jericho.
Right.
And that's the moment that we find our Savior.
Yes.
And it's all for a purpose. It's all for our good.
So hang on, however hard it is. And remember, the Lord is there, even if you can't hear him. Thanks for joining us today. We're still learning just like you. Hope to see you next week.